like to welcome everybody to our meeting tonight, and if we could just quickly identify everyone who is with us this evening.
Mayor Ducey is here.
Yeah, Mayor Ducey is here, Joanne Bergen, Alyssa Cummins, our township engineer. So folks from ACT Engineers, could you introduce yourselves?
I'm Carol Besky with ACT Engineers.
Jeff Richter from ACT Engineers. Eric Rosina from ACT Engineers. Rob Corkich from ACT Engineers.
And Janetta?
And Janetta Dix.
Okay. And if the folks from that have participated from the public, if you would like to introduce yourself. So we have Bob Schmidt. Are you here?
Yes.
And you're a Normandy Beach resident. What is your address?
528 Broad, just on the other side of 7th Avenue.
Okay, welcome, Bob. Mary Spencer?
Yeah.
Spencer, what's your address? Okay. And also from the town, we have Councilman Halloran and Councilman Minikino that's with us tonight.
Good evening, folks.
And anyone from Normandy would like to introduce yourselves? We'd love to know who's on the call.
Yeah, hi, good evening. This is Joe Sturpey. I'm from Ellison Drive.
Thank you.
Hello, this is James Hanlon. I'm from 7th Avenue at the end where we get flooding.
Thank you.
Hello, this is Mary.
Beth Dorer from 545 Broad Avenue, right next to Normandy Beach Improvement Association, the corner of 6th and Broad.
Thank you, Mary.
Stephen Timoni, 542 Broad Avenue, Normandy Beach.
Thank you.
Rich and Eileen Morano, 548 Broad Avenue.
Okay, thank you.
Janice Hershey, 530 Broad Avenue.
Rick and Terry Rizzuto, 261 Harbor Court.
Rick Rizzuto, Harbor Court.
Yes.
Walter Gotch and Lisa Gotch, 263 Harbor Court.
Thank you. Welcome.
Mary and Chris Spencer, 253 Harbor Court.
Thank you, Mary.
Jennifer Matarazzo, 519 Broad Avenue.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Ronald Ahmed, 6th Avenue.
Okay, so I got Ronald.
Robert Palmisano, 525 Broad Avenue.
Thank you.
And 318 6th Avenue.
Okay.
Steve Kirby on 321 7th Avenue.
Welcome, Steve.
Ken Solon.
316 7th.
Ken Salon, did you identify also?
Yeah, Ken Solon, 511 Broad Avenue. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Janice Howard, 3675 Broad Avenue.
Welcome, Jan.
Thank you.
Jeannie and Bill McCurdy, 527 Broad Avenue.
Welcome, Jeannie and Bill.
Because I have to do this.
Greg Lawless, 486 Ellison Drive.
Okay, Greg, welcome.
Mark Whipperman, 546 Normandy Drive.
Welcome.
John Armstrong, Normandy Drive.
Welcome, John.
Kathy and Brian Narowski at 506 Normandy Drive.
Welcome.
Hi there, Jim Muller, Ellison Drive.
Welcome, Jim.
Carolyn and Jim Dunkley, Ellison Drive.
Welcome.
Randy Wilcox, 3629 Route 35 North.
Thank you.
Bob and Nancy Swift, 514 Broad.
Welcome.
Mary and Larry Bovich, 523 Normandy Drive.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
Did we get everybody?
I don't know if you got me before. It's Rita Chaka, 316 7th.
Okay, Rita, thank you.
This is Jenna and Scott Masitis, 524 Normandy Drive.
Hi, Jenna and Scott.
Hi.
Thank you.
John Doerr, 526 Broad Avenue.
Dave Richards, 467 Normandy Drive.
Welcome, Dave.
Thank you.
All right, so again, I'll just ask everyone if they want to mute while we hear from the presentation, just to prevent background noise. You're certainly more than welcome to ask questions as we go through. And if possible, you can click the raise your hand button so that we can find a moment to and keep some order to answering the questions so no one is left out. We make sure that we get everybody. For everybody's machine, it's going to be a little bit different where you can find that. For some folks, it's on the More button with the, and it's usually down at the bottom on the bar somewhere, but you can always just ask the question if you're having trouble finding it. But if you could use the raise your hand button, that might be a little bit easier for us to manage the questions. So we appreciate everybody taking the time tonight to participate. As you know from the updates that I've sent out, the township has hired ACT engineers to take a look at what's happening in the area and to put together some data that would give us the information that we would need to make compelling arguments going forward for mitigation and hopefully funding support. So with that, I'll turn the meeting over to ACT and they'll take us through a presentation of some of their findings and recommendations.
Okay, thank you, Joanne. I am Carol Besky, the founder of ACT Engineers. 29 years ago, we started the company. I serve as the Director of Public Involvement for and Community Outreach and have led hundreds of public involvement efforts on projects for municipalities and counties and state and bi-state agencies in projects that range from maybe $10,000 to projects that have been $500 million. The projects range in areas of flooding and drainage issues to bridges and tunnels and to dredging and wetlands.
Oh, geez, you got it.
I think somebody's getting an echo in here. And dealing with shoreline restoration and a lot of work with state and federal agencies. So thank you to the Normandy Beach residents that have sent us emails. Let me say we would rather be meeting with you tonight at the First Aid Squad building, which was our original plan, and talking to you individually, but that's not yet to be with the governor's orders. So we're going to make the most of this and show you what has been developed in the concept phase of our contract. We'd like to say thank you very much for the pictures that you have been sending to us. The pictures are really very useful to us for knowing what is taking place in real time. Our one request to you would be, if you possibly could, if you could put a time and a date stamp on that. It really does help us, and we really do use the information that you're sending to us. So thank you again, and please don't hesitate to send us any pictures at any time. And now I'd like to introduce the rest of the ACT team, and that will be our next slide. Rob Korkich is a licensed professional engineer and professional planner. He's the president of ACT and head of engineering. Jeff Richter is a licensed engineer and professional planner and the director of engineering at ACT. Both Rob and Jeff have years of experience in flood mitigation and drainage issues. And both Rob and Jeff have served as consulting engineers as well as in-house engineers for many municipalities, counties, states, and departments within the state of New Jersey and elsewhere. And next, I'd like to introduce Eric Rosina, Vice President of ACT, and he is the principal in charge of the environmental services and permitting. And Janetta Dix is our Director of Environmental Services at ACT. Both Eric and Janetta are experts in the areas that involve the environment in particular, and especially in the area of environmental permitting. They both individually and collectively have very successful records in obtaining environmental permits for our clients from federal and state agencies, including NJDEP, NJDOT, New Jersey Tidelands, and the Army Corps, just to name a few. And in fact, ACT has a very good record of obtaining permits for our clients that have never been before issued by the state of New Jersey DEP or by the Army Corps. It usually starts out with the agency saying, no, that's not going to work. No, you can't do that. And with a lot of hard work and much persuasion, we have successfully obtained some very, very good permits for our clients. So now a little bit about our scope of work, which Joanne has already talked about. But I know that we've had some emails questioning what our scope of work is. So the ACT scope is really to gather and review existing information and data in the designated flood-prone areas of BRIC. We are identifying flood elevations and establishing solutions based on that information. As you know, engineering is based on data, and there is a lot of existing information available from the state, from federal agencies, such as NJDEP and their existing LIDAR, as well as the Army Corps, the Bureau of GIS, FEMA, to name some, and then obviously from BRIC Township with all of its existing infrastructure data. With that information, we're able to develop mapping for 13 designated study areas, showing the topography, giving us elevations, storm sewers, roadways, bulkheads, frequencies of flooding, and other pertinent information. Then based on all that information, ACT is able to develop and recommend conceptual engineering solutions specific to each of those 13 flood-prone areas. And that can be advanced then to engineering design and construction. So as you know, tonight's meeting, we're focusing on the Normandy Beach section of your township. On the next slide, you're going to see the 13 study areas. There we go, that we're going to be focusing on and for the township. And on the right-hand side, you see of the picture, you see the areas specifically, the areas that are specific, easy to say, specifically identified. And now I'm going to turn this over to Jeff, who's going to talk more and further the conversation. Jeff?
Yes, thank you, Carol. This is Jeff Richter from ACT Engineers. As Carol indicated, on the left side of the slide, you can see the 13 study areas that we are reviewing. Normandy Beach would be number 3 there. These are just in no random order, or in random order. On the right-hand side is an aerial photo of the township. The areas outlined in yellow represent the 13 study areas, and next to each one of those is a number and/or a number with a letter that corresponds to the study areas listed on the left side of the plan. The areas in red are the low-lying areas of the township that are subject to flooding, in this particular case to a flood elevation of 1.4. I realize that there is flooding in Normandy Beach at this point, but due to the large scale of this map, it doesn't show up, as it doesn't show up in some of the other communities as well at this scale. So if we could go to the next map. Jeanetta.
You meant blue, right, Jeff? The areas in blue.
Sorry, what did I say?
You said red. That's
Red?
okay.
The blue areas, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Blue for water. Okay. Next slide. Okay, the next slide shows 2 of the data sources that I'm sure the neighborhood is familiar with: Stevens Institute of Technology and the NOAA, which is put out by the National Weather Service. I wanted to go over this slide just so we can understand what datum we're going to be talking about. And datum refers to topography, what datum you're using for your topography. Now, the Stevens Institute of Technology datum is NAVD 88, which is the current datum used by surveyors throughout the state. That datum's used when they're collecting topography, staking out new infrastructure, and so forth. So it's the recognized datum for surveyors. And so that's the Stevens Institute of Technology datum uses that datum for their flood, for the gauge information. The particular gauge is shown there on the left is from Stevens Institute from this past few days. You can see it was 6:10 through 12 o'clock today, I believe. And you can see that the flood height is the red is the confirmed, the observed elevation, and it's under 2. It's actually 1.76, and I'll tell you how I know that when we review the next one. The purple is the projected, and the gray is the uncertainty in the projections. Now, the NOAA gauge on the right, they're both from the same gauge. They're both taken from the Manahawkin gauge on Barnegat Bay. The only difference is NOAA reports it based on the gauge elevation of 0, which is different from NADVD 88 by 0.4. And you'll notice in both of them, it says major flood, moderate flood, minor flood, and they're off by 0.4 feet. So if you're looking at the NOAA gauge in reference to NAVD 88, it's going to be 0.4 less. So you can see it says for today, the peak was 2.16 feet on the NOAA gauge, but in surveyor's terms, NAVD 88, it would have been 1.76 as shown on the graph on the left. I know that might be a little confusing, but I just want to make sure that everybody understands that for tonight, everything that we're going to show as far as conceptual is based on NAVD 88, and that what you experienced today was roughly 1.76 in that datum. So if we could go to the next slide. This shows generally the tidal range for Normandy Beach. And you can see the mean high water is 1.09 feet. The mean high water is 1.33 feet. And at Normandy Beach, the lowest road elevation is 0.85 feet. So you can see that even at mean high water and at mean high water, there's flooding in the street. For what we're looking at for the short-term conceptual design elevation would be a 1.4 to 2.0 for the elevation of any infrastructure to get above the mean high water line and the mean high water line. Again, these elevations are all in NAVD 88 as we just talked about on the prior slide. So we could go to the next slide, Janelle. Okay. This slide is also taken from the Manahawkin tide gauge. Along the bottom are the years from 2006 to 2020. And along the left side vertically is elevations, again in NAVD 88. But the blue represents the fluctuation in the tide, with obviously the high tides peaking at the top. The peak of the low tides is below the 0 line in some cases, but it's not relevant for flooding. So as you can see, we've highlighted across the top several of the peaks that have occurred and the dates that they've occurred. And you can see, and I'll show you later, or provide information data that shows that they're less occurring. There is a gap, you'll notice, between the end of 2015 and the beginning of 2017 when the gauge was out of service. This also doesn't represent any significant storms that occurred during these periods. Once the gauge is taken out of service, if you will, or they don't post the readings because of the potential for error. So in those particular cases, so there are some other storms when we had hurricanes or Superstorm Sandy that just aren't shown on this. And they obviously go above what the highest storm is.
We didn't do anything.
Are we able to ask questions now?
Jeff, I show you as muted.
Are we able to ask questions now?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just so I'm clear.
Just who's asking a question, if you don't mind?
My name is Larry Bowich. I'm 523 Normandy Drive.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm just trying to get familiar with these numbers because I understand you're saying the solution, the goal for the raised roads is 1.4 feet to 2.0 feet.
That's our design concept
This
elevation.
is the Manahawkin Bridge tide gauge.
Correct.
Didn't you just tell us that was at a different, are these numbers adjusted for the different datum or?
Yes, these are the numbers. This would be the numbers that you would see on the Stevens Institute. These, as you can see at the top, it says NAVD 88, the tide gauge. So
Right,
these, as I indicated,
Manaloki, right?
at the Manaloking, yes.
Okay, so you've adjusted them for the different datum?
Yeah, this is corrected. This is from the NAVD 88 datum. Yes, correct.
Got it. Okay, thanks. I'm just
And
taking
everything, and just to clarify, everything we talk about from now on, elevations, is going to be on NAVD 88.
So a follow-up question to that.
Sure.
So if you're designing the concept design elevation of 1.4 to 2 feet,
yes,
I'm looking at this chart properly, that's the yellow.
Correct.
All the times that the blue lines are above that top yellow line, we're going to have additional flooding. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So is there a reason why you're not trying to design to a higher design elevation to eliminate more of those blue lines?
Well, I'll get to that, but there is a reason for that, yes.
Okay.
Wow. That's a good question, man.
Okay, so you brought up the yellow. So the yellow is our design concept elevation, which is going to be based on, based on the elevations in the neighborhood now, what we can get to reasonably without having to raise homes and construct significant infrastructure. So that's the design concept, and you'll see why we picked that number in a little bit. You'll notice from the peaks here that the peak in 12/21/12 was 3.34, which was just under 3.5.
That was right after Sandy.
Sandy was up around 7 per some of the information, just for your records information. Okay, the tide elevation rises roughly 1 3/4. Based on this data, the average tide has risen roughly 1 3/4 inch per decade. Next slide. Jeanette? Okay. All right, so in our review of the neighborhoods, we did a community flooding impact assessment. We've got 2 tables here. The first one is, let me define. You'll see in the tables, the heading with the numbers below it says number of dwellings with compromised access. So what we mean by compromised access is dwellings that either have water in front of them on the roadway or would have to travel through a roadway that's flooded in order to exit the neighborhood. So you could be in a portion of the neighborhood that's dry, but if you have to, say, for instance, drive out through Broad to get out of the neighborhood, you're considered compromised access. So with that being, and taking that into consideration, we looked at the impacts less than or equal to a flood elevation of 2.0 feet, again, NAVD 88. And our short-term design approaches, for short-term design approaches would be those that would address under less than or equal to a flood of 2.0. And you see Normandy Beach is listed 2 there with 153 compromised access. Okay, on the right is the long-term design approaches for impacts greater than 2 feet to 3.4 feet to a 3.4 foot flood elevation. And again, Normandy Beach is number 2 there with 198 compromised accesses. Next slide. Janetta, next slide.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so this slide shows Normandy Beach, obviously, and the blue represents the flood level at elevation 2. This is based on current available topographic information, aerial topographic information. And you'll notice that pretty much the roadways are flooded somewhat in, kind of matches up with the photos that were sent to us today. You can see that the roadways are flooded. It goes into the yards a little bit. And as I indicated before, the flood elevation based on the Stevens Institute chart and the NOAA chart in the NAVD 88 was 1.76, so it's pretty close. So this shows the roadways that would flood. We ran models to see how the floodwaters would expand as the elevation increases. And at elevation 2, these are the roads that are impacted. You'll see orange on the photo. The orange represents the existing inlets and outlets to the bay and into the channels and harbor areas. The numbers represent the low elevation at the inlets, and you can see I think around the end of 6th Street is around 0.9, you know, and in a lot of the areas at the end of Arrow Court it's 0.83. You've got a lot of ones going up and down Normandy and 7th, and at the end of Normandy Drive.
Okay.
Go to the next slide.
Jeff, did you talk about the elevations that are shown?
Yeah, I just did.
Yes.
Go to the next one.
Unmute, though.
I'll show the other people.
Does it not want to change, Janetta?
There we go.
Okay, so this is basically the same slide with the flood elevation of 2.0. The yellow represents the low-lying roadways that are below elevation 2. Again, 2 is our projected design range.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Who's speaking?
Alan Rothman, 318 6th Avenue. So my question is, the roads that you're talking about raising on this slide would be the roads in the yellow?
They would be the roads that are low-lying and to get above flood would need to be raised.
So the ones that are highlighted in yellow on this slide?
Yeah.
Those would be all the sections that are proposed to be raised?
Okay. Send.
That's my phone.
Oh.
Well, to get above 2, they would need to be raised.
Thank you.
They're the low-lying roads.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Next. Okay, this slide shows the 3.4 as a, you know, aside from hurricanes and Sandy, there was one event on the slide that showed the 17 years where the flood got up around 1.4 or 3.4. I'm sorry. So the blue would show what would be inundated at an elevation of 3.4. You know, not the homes may or may not, depending upon the height of the first floor, but this represents the properties that would be inundated, roadways, etc. Next slide. Okay, so for conceptual mitigation design approaches, for the short-term design approaches would be to design to elevation less than or equal to 2. You know, for that flood, and it floods approximately 1,500 plus minus hours per year to that elevation of 2. And to address that, the conceptual mitigation measures would be to install check valves, raise roads, sidewalks, driveways, handicap ramps if that portion of the roadway sidewalk was raised, raise select bulkheads, and install additional drainage infrastructure where necessary. Under the long-term design approach, this would be elevations greater than 2, which would be above the yellow line we showed on the other slide. It floods above that approximately 60 hours per year. And these would be long-term design approaches. And in that would be raise roads and properties, raise bulkheads, install additional drainage infrastructure, and possibly pump stations.
Could you give an example of additional drainage infrastructure?
Who's asking?
Rich Morano, 548 Broad.
Thanks, Rich.
Well, additional infrastructure, it could be adding additional inlets, replacing or increasing the size of pipes, you know, those type of measures, because when you raise the road, you may need to add additional infrastructure to pick up the water at more locations. Because I know a lot of the areas are flat and there's not a lot of pitch. Okay.
Along with this presentation, are you going to propose cost analysis to do these things so the township, when they're applying for grant money, knows what these items are going to cost?
And can I ask who's asking?
Robert Palmisano.
Thank you.
As part of our task, we will provide the township with costs for this, but we aren't providing them tonight.
Thank you.
Okay, next slide.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Mary Bovich, 523 Normandy Drive. Can you explain why dredging is not a part of this evaluation of our lagoons?
Yes. Dredging doesn't really help with flooding because when you dredge, you make the lagoons deeper. The amount of water in the bays in the ocean is far exceeds any amount of volume that you generate by dredging. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, next. Okay, this slide shows how road improvement might impact or improve the situation. The existing road elevation shown in black. On the left side is a representation without curb, and then the other side would be a representation with curb. And the intent would be to raise the road high enough at elevation 2 in most areas so that you could get the sidewalk and the roadway out of the water. You might have some water in the gutters, but it would be very minimal compared to what's there now. So this is going to improve vehicular access to your properties during normal tide events.
Just a second, I don't care.
During extreme tide events, you probably would experience not something similar to what you have, but it would be improved because the depth wouldn't be as great. It may require driveway, sidewalks, and yard improvements to make the connection to the new higher roadway. And raising roads is really tied to the elevation of adjacent properties, driveways, but specifically garages and first floors. Homes that are built rather low, it's more difficult to raise the road a significant amount if you still have to tie into those structures because you don't want to direct stormwater to people's homes. Stormwater impacts and mitigation would need to be addressed during the final design when actual, more detailed topography is known and design plans can be prepared to mitigate these measures so that they don't impact, you don't create a worse impact to adjacent properties. And this method would need buy-in from the surrounding property owners. Okay, next slide.
So one question here.
Sure.
Who's asking?
It's John Armstrong.
Hi, John.
So does that mean since different properties have different current elevations, does that mean you're talking about the raising road would be according to the adjacent properties? So it would be higher in some areas and lower in others, so you don't inundate those lower properties. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, there's going to be a limit to how high you can go if you have properties that are very low. That would have to be worked out at final design. There might be ways to address that in the design, but
what can you describe some of those ways?
Well, you might have to, you're gonna have to raise a portion of the property. You might have to create swales or something to get the water to go around the home. It would really need to be looked at closely. The best solution would be to raise the garage or, dwelling. It seems to be more of garages that are lower, more so than the homes.
Stephen
Follow
Timon.
up with that. So to follow up with that, Robert Palmisano speaking.
Yeah.
Along Broad Avenue, which is majority of the homes have either already been raised and or rebuilt.
Right.
Well over 50% of the properties, if you raise the road 12 to 18 inches as you're proposing, is going to be above the properties. So again, without a commitment to design, I keep hearing you may have to do this, may have to do that. This is a huge project. You just can't raise the roads without creating those swales you just discussed, or other issues. I mean, more than 50%. I'm sure, again, if you've done your job, you have the data on the elevations of these properties to verify that. And that goes from Broad all the way out to Normandy Drive, beginning of Elton, all the affected areas, 7th Avenue, 6th Avenue. So you're talking about a solution here, but you're going to negatively affect more than 50% of their property. So how do you just throw it back on the homeowner?
No, like I said, you're gonna have to have more detailed topography. Based on the photos that I've seen, most of the homes have slopes still going up to the homes in the garages, like you said, because they probably have been elevated somewhat. So if we raise the edge of the road a few inches in the center, higher, you might have more pitch on your road, a cross slope, so that you can create a travel way during extreme events.
But for example, today was not an extreme event, and there was probably 6 inches of water over the crown. So you have to go up 12 to 18 inches minimum on the crown.
Right, so we're talking about I think in your area, we're talking about going up roughly maybe a foot at the center line.
Okay, and how much on the side curbing sides?
There's no curb.
Well,
on the curb, the curb would probably be in the 1.4 range. So you'd be, I think you're at 0.85. So I don't know, 6 inches or so, which you have curb there now. Worst
no,
case.
there's no curb. There's no curb along Broad Avenue, between
Broad and
you going out towards Ellison. There's no curb on Broad.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, this is Jeannie McCurdy, right next door to Robert Palmisano. I'm just wondering, Mr. Richter, have you been here? I'm just curious. Have you been in our neighborhood? Have you driven here or been here?
I have not. My Rob Korkich from our office has. I've gone down the streets on the computer, and I've seen all your photographs, but I have not been here.
Yeah,
I'm familiar with what happens in these communities. I've been to a number of them in the past. I know what you're talking about.
It might be a good idea for you to really see. Again, obviously you're saying you have eyes on with your people, but the fact that you don't know there's not a curb and some of the other things you've just mentioned, I can tell that you're not familiar with our neighborhood. So that does give me pause.
Keep going.
And I think it would be wise to come out both on a day like today when it was flooded to see some of the impacts, and on a day when there's no water in the street, so you can see exactly the elevations we're talking about, where the properties are lower than the road. And again, if you're going to raise the crown 12 to 18 inches like you're proposing, and approximately 6 inches on the curb, on the side of the road where it joins the property lines, that's going to really impact well over 50% of the properties. And you say you have to have a neighborhood buy-in. I'm not sure you're going to have that, because you're negative. That water is going to, unless it's, and again, I thought we were going to see some detailed drawings of some of those swales and how it's going to be engineered without pushing additional water on the properties.
You're not going to push additional water on the property. What are you talking about?
Bob, thank you for that. This is Stephen Timoni, 542 Broad Avenue. I'm at ground zero here. And I have a really simple question. Where did the water come from today? I still have water in front of my house right now. I'm looking at it. It's been there since 3 a.m. this morning. I got up and I saw it, and it just continued to remain there pretty much all day. Well, all day, because it's still there now. So my question is, where did that water come from today? On the corner of 6th Avenue.
From the bay.
Well,
how did it get onto the street?
Well, Steve, being at Broad Avenue in front of 2 catch basins right in front of my home, It flowed up through the catch basins alone. Not breaching any
Excuse
bulkheads.
me, this is Carol.
Not come up through the-
Engineers.
not
I'm
come up
going to
through the
suggest
groundwater.
that we continue with the presentation. Jeff is going to be addressing some of these issues. So let it move on with the presentation, and then we're going to have an opportunity to answer more questions. But I think you need to do the rest
Are
of
you
it.
cutting me off? You're cutting me off?
We'd like to continue with the presentation, Mr. Tamaki.
I'd like an answer to my question. I've asked this question by email a number of times. Where is the water coming from? I don't need Mr. Palmisano to tell me where the water's coming from,
Well,
although he knows.
We
I'd
did
like the township and the engineers to tell me where the water's coming from.
You ready?
Yes.
Okay. The water probably is coming from the bay up through the storm sewer system, because the water is going to achieve a level. Whatever the level in the bay is, it's going to achieve a level through the storm sewer system if there's no check valve. Depending upon the soil type you have in the area, it could be coming up through the ground as well.
Thank you.
Go ahead and continue. Thank you.
Okay. All right. The next one is just, the slide just shows.
Excuse me 1 minute. This is Stephen Timoni again.
Yep.
About the water coming up from the groundwater. Has that been determined by anybody at the township or by your engineering firm? Are we experiencing ground level water coming up?
We have not investigated that. That was not part of our task.
Wait, you weren't, that's not part of your work order?
Part of our work is to come up with conceptual designs. That would be part of a design. That would be investigated as part of a design.
Okay, well, if anybody understands that, they're smarter than me.
Well,
Thank
wouldn't you come up with a conceptual design after figuring out the source of the water? So you would have to know whether the water's coming up through the ground.
Why?
Before you create a solution.
We're proposing conceptual solutions that would need to be investigated further based upon additional surveying and geotechnical information.
Wow. So basically, this is a schematic drawing.
This is a schematic drawing that we're looking at,
Okay,
yes.
So we are years away from any type of solutions that will have any future impact on the neighborhood.
I can't answer that.
The results will.
Okay, Mr. Richter, please continue.
Okay. Okay, the two photos here just show two samples. If this is your neighborhood, it's not necessarily, you know, the way it's going to be, but they were good photos to use to show two potential solutions to the problem or what the results might be. The one on the left shows if there is a problem with raising the grade along the properties, it may only be possible to raise the road enough to create a passable lane down the center of the roadway, but you might still have water in the gutters as represented by the blue. The one on the right would be one where the homes are a little higher and you might be able to raise the edge of the road and the center of the road and then do some grading where the green's shown up into the property to direct the runoff from the property to the gutter so that it can be collected by the storm sewer system. All right, next slide. This schematic shows the installation of a check valve, both with and without. The top one would be without a check valve, which kind of shows what we were just talking about, the water backing up into the pipe as the tide rises. And then you have water in the gutter and beyond, depending upon the height of the tide. The bottom one would be with a check valve. The check valve would be either inline or a flapper at the end of the pipe. For these to work properly, they need to be maintained, and you got to make sure that the end is clear so that it can discharge. This shows that there's a potential for water to stay in the pipe and in the inlets, represented by the blue. This is caused could be caused or would be caused if the discharge pipe never daylights, if you will. That means the water is always above the pipe. Then there's no way for the pipe to drain dry if the pipe is submerged in the bay side. If the tide goes out far enough that the pipe becomes exposed, then the pipe would be able to drain dry. But in a lot of the situations that Rob saw, the pipes were submerged. So you're going to see some standing water in the inlets. Next slide.
Can I ask a question on this, please?
Sure.
On your previous slide in the Larry Bovich 523 Normandy Drive, on the previous slide then, in that scenario where the check valve is under the level of the water, then if you also have rain, then the rain doesn't go anywhere, right?
Correct.
Okay, so
Unless, unless you have to have a separation between the tide elevation and the elevation of the rainwater in the inlet or in the gutter of the road. If you get the correct separation, it'll force the valve open, and even though it's submerged, it'll flow out. But without that, it'll stay closed.
So when I refer back to your two different types of solutions, I don't know what you call them, like short-term and long-term solutions, it appeared to me that the ultimate solution was a pump station, right? And so would a pump station supersede all of these design attempts?
Well, this pump station would be, pump station you would be able to get all the water out.
Okay, like in every scenario, right? Groundwater, rainwater, high tide, low tide, the pump station would work in every scenario?
But there's a significant cost for that, and it's not going to be one pump station.
And where would the pump station exit? In the bay or the ocean?
In the bay.
The ocean.
Again,
and this cost, the primary reason a pump station is not even being proposed here or discussed?
It's listed as a long-term solution.
And why couldn't we apply for that grant money sooner than later so it's not long-term? If part of your assignment is to help the town complete the grant applications?
Correct.
So why are we not then applying for those funds now instead of putting it off, fearing that we're not going to receive the grant?
Well, there's going to be a certain amount of money that you're going to be able to.
If you get denied, you can't reapply a couple years later. Why? I don't understand why we wouldn't apply for that now, knowing we have a serious problem and we want to address it seriously and not put little Band-Aids on it.
Well, it's more than just the pump stations. You're going to need to, for one, you're going to need, all the bulkheads are going to have to be raised, because if you're going to go with pump stations, you've got to keep all the water out. So that would mean you'd have to bulkhead the whole island or the whole Normandy Beach area to get up high enough to keep the water out. And then you would have to have the pump stations to, one, draw down any groundwater, and two, to pump out the stormwater. Because of the way Normandy Beach is laid out, you would probably need multiple pump stations that are going to need to go on somebody's property. And they can pump out, you could pump it to wherever, but you can pump it into the bay. Again, you're talking about a major volume of water between the bay and the ocean that pumping out the Normandy Beach area is not going to make it come back in.
Mr. Richter, this is Stephen Timoni again, 542 Broad Avenue. How often does the bay water breach bulkheads and breach the bay beach here in New Jersey? I mean in Normandy Beach. How often does the water actually breach the bulkheads and/or breach the bay beach, which is directly across from my house?
Well, it does. In the previous slide that I showed you from the last 14 years, there was one time when it got up to where it would do that. It appears to do that. We don't have elevations on all the bulkheads, but it only takes one area. Go back to that slide, June, way at the beginning. The 3.4. And that's why we picked 2 as a design elevation to get the roadways elevated. This is what it would look like at 3.4, which it's gotten close to in the last 14 years.
Okay, so in the last 14 years,
Mhm.
which is a pretty good span in most people's lives,
Well, you
the
gotta take out
water
the
has,
hurricanes.
the bay has only breached the bulkhead one time?
Well, I don't know if it could have been more times because there are some low areas. We don't know how high the bulkheads are.
Like, has water ever encroached upon the tennis courts here?
Why are you asking him that question?
I don't know.
Has water ever encroached upon the Bay Beach house here?
No, Sandy.
So why then, if you're not having water encroaching over bulkheads onto the Bay Beach, onto the Bay Beach house? Well, let me ask you this. Has anybody from your company been in this neighborhood? Any of the partners in the company? Carol, have you been here?
Absolutely.
Carol's
So,
been there,
Good.
and so is the
Okay, so
president.
that's good. That's good. Great.
and,
Thank you.
and Rob Corkage, the president of our company, has been there, and
Okay,
some
good.
of our other crew has been there. It's just that Jeff is a master designer and an engineer, but he has not had the opportunity.
That's fine. I just wanted to thank you. I just wanted to know if anybody else had been here. That's great. So one time in 14 years, the bay water has breached bulkheads in the beach, but many, many times I have water that is on my property, approaching my front steps, approaching my garage. And I own one of the oldest houses in my house was built in 1926, and we didn't put it on stilts. But I still have water around my property all the time. Okay, the storm drains are filled to the top every single day, 365 days a year.
Right.
So
They don't have any pictures.
this doesn't have anything to do with the fact that the storm drains might be ineffective right now.
They clearly are, you moron.
Jeez.
Somebody should mute themselves.
Did somebody just call me a moron?
Sure. Where's the third one?
I get cut off and then somebody calls me a moron, okay? So, but I still have water in front of my house, and I've had water in front of my house for the past 7 years, okay? And nobody's done a damn thing to correct it. And I don't hear a plan to correct it. I hear a plan to raise roads that's gonna make water come into my house, okay? And continue to have storm drains that are ineffective. We have evidence today, by admission, these storm drains don't work. The water does not drain out into the bay. Why do we still have these storm drains? Please explain that to me. Because you know what? Maybe I am a moron.
To be fair, I don't think we've let them finish their presentation yet. So I'm not even fully sure I'm aware of what they're proposing at this time, because we're stuck on this slide.
I'm not either. They haven't proposed anything.
I would just like to hear them finish, and then I think we can maybe come back to why we feel some of these solutions might not work.
And who's speaking right now?
This is Jenna Masitis.
Okay. I'm going to take your suggestion as a good one. Let them continue.
Excellent. These are some of the bulkheads where you've got some breaches. You've got different heights of bulkheads. There's a low spot in the bulkhead. That's at the end of Normandy Drive, I believe, at the curve. So some of the solutions could be to improve the bulkheads, living shorelines, rock revertments, or et cetera. Next. Carol?
Okay, so what our next steps, and we really have presented solutions here that are what we're terming short-term, or solutions that can help out in the near future. We certainly are very much aware that there's a long-term plan for dealing with flooding and mitigation. But what our task, meaning what we're looking at right now, are some short-term relief for the residents of Normandy Beach. And as Jeff said, we're going to need to collect more topographic information for mapping on specific areas. We're going to, as was strongly suggested, identify and pursue more funding sources for Brick Township. And funding sources include going to the Army Corps, trying to get money from FEMA, working with New Jersey Office of Emergency Management, and NJDOT with some of their local grant programs, which is being used on a shared service with already you guys are doing with Tom's River. So obviously securing funding and working on those kinds of budget items are something that needs to move forward. We're going to also presenting some recommendations for revisions to the township ordinance for future design standards. And we will continue to make sure that we coordinate our efforts with what Tom's River is doing in your area, and then developing strategy and allocating funds and implementing, meaning moving forward with the design, with the permitting and the construction as this moves into the actual design stage. And
Brian, I'm just going and talk about the,
pardon?
leave this in there, my phone. I'm just gonna go in and ask him about the debriefing.
Cool, yeah, sounds good.
I'm not sure if somebody's asking a question or.
I don't think so, Carol.
Okay, so I'm just going to go back and say that what we are doing to date is conceptual design. There's a process with engineering, and it starts with a concept design, and then based on that information and moving it forward, it moves into the actual design, and then all the permits that would be required to move forward with that design, which will lead to construction. And this is what is going to be focused on as a near-term solution. If you're going to wait for pump stations and think that that's your answer, you're talking multi-million dollar projects, and that's not going to happen right away. So we are trying to find solutions for you that work near term and at least eliminate some of the problems that you're dealing with. And at that, I will turn it back over to you, Joanna.
Sure.
I have a question with John Armstrong again. I just have one last question about the road elevation. So since we're dealing with two townships, just hypothetically, if Tom's River were to go ahead with its road raising and Brick were not to, say for residents not agreeing to, what would happen to the Brick section? Would Brick be more inundated with water, or would it be the same as it is now? And it's just that Tom's River would be, less inundated, or how would that work if the two halves of the township didn't agree?
Well, we first are in the process of applying for a grant, right? So we have to submit that application, which the council has agreed via resolution, and we've approved the shared services, and we submit that in concept. If that's funded, then we would have a meeting with Tom's River and the residents on the roadways included in the project, and work together to come up with a solution. If that includes some work on private properties to help match the elevations, I mean, we have to really talk it through, with the goal being of going forward with a joint application. Because I think Carol's point was well taken, that if we put all our eggs in a pump station basket, we are not going to see change in the near future, if at all. That is a multi-million-dollar project that's above and beyond one municipality's ability to pull together. And we have met with FEMA, and we have talked to NJOEM, and we have talked to people that and explained our problems. And we have an uphill battle in getting funding for roadway elevations and other things, because we don't meet what they consider their benefit cost, because we are not generating flood claims. So we need to go forward with what we can and try to work out the details as they become viable plans. So that would be how we would approach the roadway elevation shared service with Township.
Could I ask a question? This is Bill McJames. I'm on 7th Avenue. Can you hear me?
Yes, Bill.
Okay. I heard a number of solutions, most of which would take a lot of time and money, but it seems to me the check valves on the outflows of the storm sewers, why I acknowledge they won't fix all of the problems, but they will fix quite a bit of it. Are we considering doing this in steps? In other words, if we get just enough funding to do that, we would do it. We wouldn't wait for everything else to happen.
And the good news with that, Bill, is that we are poised to do that in a very short order. So the council, the mayor and council have approved a capital budget that included funding for flapper valves. And that capital budget was approved on Tuesday night at our council meeting, as was the resolution to go out for bid for the purchase and installation of these valves. That it would be a 2-year contract with multi-sized valves. So it's kind of a fluid approach to where we need to put them, which we would do based on installing them, seeing how the neighborhood's reacting, seeing where, you know, where we need to install more. And so those things are happening in very short order. So that we're excited about that, and that will be coming to your neighborhood. That would be one of the first mitigation approaches that you'll see in the near future.
Do you have some timing on that, Carol?
Well,
I mean,
that's really
just roughly.
That's really the township, Bill. So
Okay.
Carol and ACT have been aware. You know, they've been part of our strategies, but that was up to the mayor and council to fund that, which they've done, which is outside of the contract for ACT to do their studies. So that has been approved. The capital budget's been approved. We've gone out to bid. We have to get those bids in. We have to award a contract, and then we would meet with the vendor and talk about a timeline for the delivery and installation. And hopefully our utility crew can do the installation, which would shave off even some more time. So
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of researched that. I am friends with a guy that works for an engineering firm. So I think that's, again, it's not going to solve everything, but it will solve the water coming as backflow into the storm sewer. If it rains at the same time, you're going to get a couple inches anyway.
yeah,
About that installation?
we're excited, you know, we're excited to be doing that, Bill. So thanks for the question.
Yeah, no, I think that you're going in the right direction for that.
Bill, if I could just add to that, it's a great observation. And we are working in municipalities, and in Ocean City is one that you might be familiar with. And installing those check valves and keeping them clean and functional can make a great deal of difference for you in the very short term.
Okay. Carol?
It's Mike Lackland. I have a question for you. To install the flapper valves on the existing storm sewer infrastructure, I guess I can assume that the existing storm sewers are serviceable. They're in good enough shape to warrant fixing those. Is that accurate?
Yes, that is absolutely accurate. I hope you don't mind as Joanne jumping in. So, you know, one of the questions that's been raised previously by, you know, resident in the neighborhood was that the storm drains were failing. The storm drains are 70 years old and not working anymore. So we worked with the MUA and sent our utility crews out, and we have done a camera, use their MUA camera truck to get into these drains to see if they were fully functioning and in good shape, and they are absolutely fully functioning and are in good shape.
Thank you very much for that. That was important that we get on the table.
You're very welcome.
I'd like to add on to that, Jim Hanlon. Next slide. The town is not represented tonight, I believe, just the ACT, right?
The township's here as well, sir. Mayor Ducey's here, Councilman Halloran, Councilman Minikino, our township engineer, Alyssa Cummings, and myself. I'm Joanne Bergen.
Great. The engineer had told us that approximately 8 were going to be purchased, not enough for all of them. Has that changed, and now they're doing all of them?
Well, Alyssa, I don't know if you want to chime in, but what I can respond to is that we have a tentative list that was, you know, our engineer's top priority areas that include Normandy Beach and Shore Acres and some other parts of town. But we did go with a 2-year contract so that we could have this be a fluid list, and that we could go back to this vendor and allocate more money as we needed for additional valves. So we have a priority list to start with, and if that grows, we'll deal with that as it comes.
So do you have an idea? Is it approximately 8 that are done? So all of them are not going to be done right away.
No, we have a list that we're gonna get started with right away. There's at least 3 in Normandy. That's at the top of the list. There's other locations as well, like I said.
Right. That was my understanding, and that clarifies because earlier it seemed to say that you were going to do all of them in Normandy over the next 2 years.
No, we have, like we said earlier in our presentation, there's 13 low-lying areas, so we are going to be installing these valves throughout the township.
Okay, so that will help the most pressing areas in Normandy, but not all of the Normandy problems.
Not right out of the gate, sir, no, but yes, the most pressing ones, yes.
Okay, I just wanted that clarification for everybody to be aware of.
Joanne,
Please identify those 3 areas, those 3 valve locations.
Okay, I think I've sent this to you guys before, but I'm happy to say it again. It's 401 7th through 529 Broad. A 12-inch tide flex inline check valve was installed in 2016. It's not working, so that will be replaced. 541 Broad at the clubhouse, a 12-inch tide flex inline check valve again installed in 2016. That's not working. That will be replaced. 519 to 523 Broad Ave, where there's an outfall to Barnegat Bay.
And we know they're not working because they're not properly maintained. The town committed 100% to maintaining according to the manufacturer's specifications. Hello?
You're just making an allegation. It wasn't a question. So is anybody else?
No, that's not an allegation because I personally spoke to the MUA gentlemen that were out this week. He said 2 problems. The pipes, before they can send the camera down, they had to clean them out because they were loaded with sand.
Which, of course, that's par for the course in that area.
I understand that. So therefore, you need to maintain them because the flapper valve will not work if it doesn't seal properly. And if sand is regularly going down that flapper valve, it's useless. And that's exactly why the old ones aren't working. And I'm sure in the manufacturer's instructions, they'll say that they must be and kept clean at a regular time frame. And I'm asking if the township's going to be committed to following that procedure.
The valve that we are looking to secure is.
Do you want me to turn this off?
There's somebody who's not muted, and it's really.
Somebody please mute themselves. They're interrupting this meeting.
You have to mute who's ever not muted.
It's Jim.
Jim who?
It looks. I don't know, but he's showing up on my screen shows him.
And the host should be able to mute them. Have the host mute them.
I'm just trying not to.
There, go there.
Okay. Let's see who else.
Yeah, it's been a little rough hearing a few things because of the.
Okay, so the new flapper that we have in mind that we are hoping to secure is one that the company came to us and said, this is new technology, it's cutting edge, it works very differently, we guarantee you'll be pleased with it, and they installed it. Is it on Van Note, Alyssa? Is it on Van Note? Is it? Yes.
Yes.
So on Van Note, and it's been in place for a year, and we have found it to be as successful as they projected, and it did not require the amount of intervention that was required of flappers in the past. So we obviously don't like to invest in things that we don't maintain. So our goal is to obviously maintain it so that it's functioning, but at a way that's realistic for the manpower and the time that we have. Is there another question?
Out of curiosity,
Joanne and the mayor, you represented repeatedly that the storm drain pipes are functional and they're working. Could you please explain to me how they are working? Because I never see rainwater drain from those pipes into the bay. I look every time it rains, I don't see rainwater coming out of those pipes. So how are they functional?
Because they want the water in, so pipe works both ways. I mean, obviously the engineer explained it a little better than I can, so the water has to find a level. So if the water's at a level and the tide check valve is not working, the water is coming in through that pipe.
but the water never goes out. So how is that functional? If you have a storm drain that lets water in to flood streets and rainwater never drains from the pipes into the bay, how is that functional?
I respectfully
It's
disagree.
letting the water in. So it's letting the water in. That means it's functional. The water goes both ways with the tide. The tide comes in, the tide goes out. If the water's in there constantly, it's because the level of the water, and the thing that's not working is the check valve and or the bladder. When the bladder was in there, the water wasn't coming up through the drains.
But isn't the
rainstorm that happened in January, and then you asked for the bladders to be removed. So we had to listen to the one resident for whatever reason. We didn't know there was a general voice. So the bladder showed the success of once it's blocked.
But it doesn't.
Isn't the purpose of a storm drain, and excuse me because I'm a really dumb guy, isn't the purpose of a storm drain to drain rainwater from the streets?
Melissa, are you answering?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And when we had the pipes blocked with the bladders, we actually received requests to remove the bladders because the rainwater wasn't draining from the streets.
The rainwater, Alyssa, never drains from the street.
Well, when we removed the bladders, they drained.
No. If you visited, took the time, and I'll meet somebody here tomorrow morning. I'd love to do this inspection. If you look in those grates, every single day, those grates are filled to the top with water. There's
Agreed.
no way in hell that water is going to drain, rainwater is going to drain through those grates into the bay. They're filled to the top every single day, all right? And I don't know, I may be stupid, but I'm not blind.
Well, what happens when it rains? Where does the water go?
I don't know. I think it probably just drains along the street and evaporates. It doesn't go down.
I think it mixes with the bay water and goes out with the bay when the tide recedes.
Well, why is the level at the grade level always to the top?
Because your streets are at elevation 0.9. And that's the elevation of the bay.
So hence, the storm drain sewer system does not work. No. Even if you walk up to Route 35, I did with my wife, she's here. Mm-hmm. She'll swear to this. We walked up today, we looked, every single storm drain in Normandy Beach on Route 35 was filled to the top. Filled to the top.
Hey, Steve, if you don't mind, I would like to get a question in. It's a question for the engineering team. Is it possible that these 14 or so odd, catch basins or drains, inlets, whatever you're calling them, that maybe a lot of them are actually more of a problem than a solution? Would we be better off, like particularly in front of Steve's house, they be better off just plugged up? So instead of having 1,500 hours of flooding, you might have 30, 40 hours of standing rainwater?
We did that with the bladders. I don't mean to interrupt. I know you asked the design team, but I do want to point out that we did that with the bladders. We left the bladders in for a few days, and when it rained, we got calls to remove them.
Yeah, I looked at those bladders, Alyssa, and I don't think those bladders held the bay back. I think it leaked by.
Who asked you to remove them?
I don't know. The call went to Public Works.
But I mean residents.
Yes.
So you listened to a resident who just told you to remove the bladders, but we're not the experts.
I only wanted to put the bladders in as a test. Excuse me. We put the bladders in as a test to see if the valves would work.
For a few days.
Listen,
Morano, can I say one thing, please?
No, if Mrs. Morano, let me just finish if you don't mind, and then I'll be quiet. It's still a conceptual question for the engineering team. Is it possible that a majority of these drains, particularly in front of Mr. Timoni's house, are more of a problem than they're a help? If the answer is no, then that's fine. Is it possible that they're more of a problem?
You can't eliminate the storm drains because otherwise the storm water is just going to back up and continuously. Like Alyssa said, when the water, it doesn't appear that it's going anywhere because the storm sewers are full, but the hydraulics of it is that once the elevation in the street gets a little higher and the bay starts moving out, even though the pipe's still covered, there is water that's going to start flowing out towards the bay. But it probably can't get all the way out because the pipe's partially submerged. or
Understood,
submerged
but
all the way.
but based on your own data, I mean, there's 1,500 some odd hours, right, of the year that there's water sitting on the street. So would we have that many hours water sitting on the street if we just had rainwater sitting on the street?
Well, that was 1,500 hours was when the tide was, I think it was above elevation 2.
Yeah. So in front
So
of,
if you can keep the tide out on those days, then you wouldn't have that water in the street.
right, so that's what I'm weighing one against the other. 1,500 hours, you plug up the drains, 1,500 hours, you don't have that water on the street. You only have water on the street when it rains. It's a trade-off. I don't know which is worse. I'm really just asking.
Right, and then the water, by having the check valve, if it's closed because the tide's up and it's raining, which is going to happen, then the water is going to accumulate in the street. As soon as the tide recedes to the point where the elevation of the water is higher in the streets than in the bay, the water is going to start moving out towards the bay.
Got it, but we're only getting 3 check valves. So in the meantime, is plugging up the drain a better idea? And I'm just going to ask that question one last time.
Well, there's nowhere for the water to go then. If you plug the drains, the water is just going to sit in the street until it evaporates or soaks into the ground, which is going to take a long time. Especially if you have multiple rains and multiple days, it's going to be worse.
Hello, this is Beth Dorer. I'm at directly next to the Bay Beach House at 545 Broad Avenue, directly across from the street from Steve Timoni. And I hear his pain. I was the resident who asked that the bladders be removed because my driveway was blocked by standing rainwater. The elevation, if you go back to, I believe it's the 3rd or 4th slide, shows that the elevation in front of the Bay Beach House is 0.9 feet, one of the lowest elevations in Normandy Beach,
Right.
versus in front of Steve Timoni's house, which is, I guess it's only 2 inches higher at 1.08 inches or feet. Question for you, that Steve raised a very good question. Is there a way that we can test the geography and the permeability of the land, such as actually digging a hole in our property to see whether that hole fills up with water? And 2, how do we determine whether that is groundwater from rainwater, fresh water, or bay water coming up from the bay? And then my second question is, what is the decibel level of these pump stations that, as you had stated during your presentation, would have to be placed in multiple locations in town? But if the permeability of the land is such that water is just rising up through the land, would those pump stations really be a solution? So there's 2 questions there for the engineers. Thank you.
Well, you certainly could dig a hole on your property, and you'd have to compare the elevation out in the bay with the elevation that you find the water in your property, and it's probably going to be pretty close for the most part. As far as the pump station goes, the pump stations would be similar, probably larger though than some of the pump stations for sanitary sewer, some of the larger stations. These stations are located in residential neighborhoods all the time. They'd be underground, so you're not going to really, and the pumps will be running, underground and in the water. It'd be submersible pumps, so you're not going to hear, the pumping per se. You would hear possibly a generator, but there would probably be some sort of arresting device on the exhaust to help dampen that, but that would be only in a power outage situation if it were so designed that way. If you have high water and very porous soils, more than likely if you have a pump station, you're going to also need to install an underground collection system to help pick up the water and keep the water table down on the landward side of bulkheads, berms, et cetera, at the water's edge.
And where would that be suggested in Normandy Beach? This is Beth Dorer at 545 Broad again.
What, pump stations?
Yes.
Well, like I said, because of the topography, you would need multiple pump stations probably throughout the neighborhood. So you'd have to find a spot to put these stations. They're not very big. They're not as big as a property, but you're going to need an area to put an underground facility in. And the reason I say you're going to need multiple stations is because you can only run so far with your underground storm sewer system at a flat level. And the neighborhood kind of snakes around into little peninsulas. So you're going to need probably more than one station to handle all the water.
And what is the recommended elevation before you consider a pump station? If we're already looking at only 1 foot above normal flood level, does that make sense?
Well, in our recommended long-term solutions, it would be anything above 2. What you would start looking at pump stations once you got above 2, elevation 2.
So does a pump station really make sense when we could elevate our roads to 2 feet for a much lower cost than the multi-million-dollar pump station?
Well, raising the roads is going to be obviously less of a cost, and you can probably get a better impact for more homes. And the reason we showed on the one slide where you only had a few instances where the tide went above 2, in those instances would be, the instances that would need to be handled by a pump station. So what I say, there were 60 hours per year that you would have, multiple $1-million pump stations to handle a handful of times. You could get more for raising the roads, installing check valves. You could impact more residents on a more of a positive way for more tide events, if you will.
So your basic answer to the decibel level is that of a home generator running continuously during the flooding event. Is that correct?
What I'm saying is the noise you would hear from the pump stations would be probably the generator if the power is out. If the power is out, you're not going to hear very much at all. I mean, if the power is on and the stations are powered by the electric company, you're not going to hear very much because the pumps are going to be located, they're going to be in water. So if you can imagine running a submersible pump in a pool or something, you can't hear the pump.
Hi, this is Eileen Morano. I've been waiting to ask my question or make my statement now. I hate to go back to bladders, but I want to ensure that the engineering team understands what happened in that scenario. It was not just Beth that asked for the bladder to be removed. There were at least half a dozen people that were experiencing worse flooding and the bladders were in place. I was one of them at the beach. When the bladders were in, we probably should have had the pipes vacuumed out significantly before that was done, that issue. But once those bladders got put in, flood water went up 6th Avenue towards the highway, more so than it ever had before. So I hear the mayor's frustration. You've made that comment like, but you guys wanted it out. We didn't have the luxury of waiting a month or so to study it because we were having damage to our houses, quite frankly. So instead of talking about water that's at the gutter level, you're talking about water breaching the sidewalks, going into people's front yards and garages.
Eileen, thank you for clarifying.
That's why bladders were asked to be removed. And Alyssa, in terms of where, in terms of where the rainwater goes into the bay. In some scenarios, like not every house is the same in Normandy Beach. So we all get a little passionate about our own little situations. But in front of my house, the water never drains. That is not an exaggeration. At best, I have wet black mud around the front of my house and the side. So we never see that initial water drain. And then if we have a rain event, that's the water on top of it. So I really would like to stress that you spend some time here during these events. My house is the southernmost house on Broad Avenue within Brick Township. The house or the empty lot next to me starts Tom's River. I can tell you that Tom's River Road is slightly higher because it has been paved more than our road, and just that much causes their water to come in front of my house. So we've got all different scenarios here. I'm hoping everybody can just calm down a little bit and hear out the rest of the presentation, but I want to make sure that we're dealing in facts. So thank you.
Thank you, Eileen.
Carol, my name's Steve Kirby. Have you ever been given the neighborhood plan consultants report for the barrier island that was done after Hurricane Sandy? Was that handed to you by Brick?
No, we have not received that.
Okay, well, two things come to mind. One, I'm afraid Brick hasn't followed up at all with any of the suggestions, because the report on 122 specifically says that large parking lots should use permeable asphalt. And we just had a huge parking lot over here that was not done that way after they spent thousands and thousands of dollars on this report. Also in the report, it discusses about Hoboken's reverse sewer system. They have a combined sewer system up in Hoboken. And since we're talking about all these pumping stations, et cetera, I've been told 2 or 3 times by people in residence, engineers in town here, as well as Bricktown, that we can't use the pumping stations that already exist to pump not only sewage off the island, but also rainwater. And it seems to me, if we're thinking big and down the road, someone has to get to the state and say, you can reverse and use these sewer drains that are about 10 feet below the storm drains, and reverse that water that accumulates from the rain up to the existing pumping stations that are on Route 35 and pump them back across the bay to a cleansing station. And Manahawkin could be advantaged by that. South Manahawkin, Tom's River, parts of Normandy Beach, Lavalette. I mean, the whole island could be drained by something they do in Hoboken. And I keep being told that, well, there's clean water action laws and regulations. But to me, if you as our consultants were able to say that's a viable alternative, although it's out of the box, somebody at the state may listen to us.
So this, Mr. Kirby, this is Eric Rosina calling, talking, and I do a lot of the environmental permitting. What you're proposing is an out-of-the-box solution, and maybe worth considering. However, one of the things that does is it pumps all of that, all of the bay water, the tide water, and stormwater, for that matter, through the treatment plant. And that ends up you end up having an overflow at the treatment plant, because the treatment plants are not designed to take that kind of flow. And you end up bypassing the treatment plant, and anything that's in that pipe gets discharged. And that's exactly the problem that Philadelphia is having right now. A lot of your larger cities have these problems where they have some combined sewer systems, and they're spending multiple billions of dollars in Philadelphia right now trying to isolate the stormwater out of that system, because they have an EPA permit requirement for that, and every time they bypass, all of that effluent goes right into the rivers. So our clean streams laws prevent that, and getting those permitted today is near to impossible. So just wanted to lay that out there.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, we talked about the storm drainage system, and I've talked to a number of environmental experts and attorneys regarding alternatives to what we have here. Have you considered alternatives? Are there alternative storm drainage systems that we can consider and possibly implement here?
So again, this is Eric, and I'll just step in there. Yes, we're looking at multiple solutions here. There is no one solution for any area. We have limited data that we work with. One of the things that we need to know to get to final design is garage elevations, as we talked about, first floor, finished floor, first floor elevations in the area. so that we can address some of these area-specific concerns with the design. So we've looked at multiple solutions, and some of them are limited by, your questions are spot on tonight. The geotechnical information of what's in the soils and how those soils transmit water is a key component, because we can't put a pump big enough to pump the bay. And even if we could put a pump in big enough to pump all of the water that's coming in from the bay in a extreme event, even if we could do that, we'd have to be able to keep the water out, as Jeff talked about. We'd have to make sure that every single bulkhead was at a sufficient elevation to keep the bay water out, and the soils were tight enough to prevent the migration into your yards, because that water would also end up in the system. So those pumps would be very large. They should be tremendously expensive. And so what we're trying to do is create, where's that sweet spot in the short term that we can get a lot of benefit for what we can afford to do today, and what can we plan for tomorrow as houses and bulkheads deteriorate and they need to be replaced. As we start to plan for this, how do we make the whole system improve over time and get more resilient over time? Some of these solutions are going to be, yes, there's a near term that we can get to, and we can improve things significantly. And what is that we have to plan for? What is it that we have to be able to have a concept cost for, to be able to pursue funding, to be able to make this happen? So it's kind of a two-step solution to get to where we want to be. But there's the short term of what's achievable, and and then there's the long term of what we need to plan for. So there's two steps here, and it's going to take multiple solutions that are area specific, which is why we get to final design when we actually look at those unique areas and unique factors. So just want to lay that out there.
So someone represented,
Thank you.
somebody represented from ACT Engineers that the water has breached the bulkhead one time in 14 years. If that's the case, again, aren't there alternatives to the storm drainage sewer system that we have in place today? And I've been told there are, and I don't want to challenge you engineers, because I'm not an engineer, I'm a dumb lawyer. Are there alternatives to this type of storm drainage sewer system? I understand that this type of system would never be proposed today with today's environment and with our low-lying levels of property here, that this would not be the type of storm drainage system that would be proposed and implemented. Now, my understanding is that the township has an obligation to provide a workable storm drainage system to the residents and taxpayers of a municipality. If that's the case, we have standing water, stagnant water, almost every day on our streets, which the CDC has determined is an environmental health risk to the residents and the children that are walking down our streets. There must be an alternative, a short-term alternative to fix this. I'm asking you as professionals, as experts, what are the alternatives to a grate, a pit, and a pipe running to the bay? There must be a more sophisticated way to drain our stormwater. I can't believe that there's not. Elon Musk is putting people in space.
Oh, shit.
Figure
Yeah,
out.
and there's no pitch. There's absolutely no pitch. Don't you get it? There's no, this is insane what you're asking.
No, it's not insane. Because
there's no pitch.
when
Don't you understand if you
what does that mean, there's no pitch? What does it explain?
Because you're not on a hill. If you're on a hill, you drain down, sir.
Yeah,
It's
so
basic.
because the existing system doesn't work. We're not on a
Because
hill.
you're underwater. It's underwater. You're wasting people's time. We got to elevate the road so that we can safely get out of our neighborhood.
You're a goddamn
Steve, man.
fucking idiot.
All right, that's it for you, Mr. Timoni. So I think this would be a good opportunity for us to,
Hey, guys, can I just ask one question here of the Brick Township Committee?
who is this?
Hi, this is Jim Muller of Ellison.
Yes.
Yeah, you know, at the very beginning of the presentation, it was laid out actually that there are a number of areas throughout Brick that are going to require remediation
Yes.
for flooding. And then if I interpreted this correctly, what we need is a grant or application for a grant. And I'm curious, in that process, would Brick Township be putting the dozen or so areas that needed grant money in a single application, or would each of the projects like Normandy, like Shore Acres seem to be neck and neck with Normandy Beach as the need to help residents? Would each of these applications go in simultaneously, or would Brick Township apply for one massive grant for all these areas?
Well, the likelihood of us getting one massive grant for all the neighborhoods is slim to none. So what all funding entities want to see is a strategy. So the first thing that they want to see is that you've retained a firm, you've got data together, hard data, facts, and we've done that. We've done that with ACT and with what you're seeing tonight, because no grant would be funded without the backup of here's what's happening and why. And they want to see realistic strategies as well. So if you go in with a multi-million-dollar grant application, your likelihood of being funded is minimal at best. And when we
So are you doing something simultaneous for Normandy and for Shore Acres and other areas, and then all these grant applications will go in?
Yeah, so we're doing two things. One is the constant pursuit of potential grant opportunities, but I think the mayor wants to speak briefly on, what he has planned in terms of capital, because funders want to see not only a strategy, but they want to see what you are willing to bring to the table. There's no grant that's out there that does not have a match requirement. They want, so we have to be ready with funding to, take a share of whatever it is that we are asking for. So with that, I'll ask the mayor if he wants to share just a little bit of his strategy for capital funding.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
So basically, since I became mayor, I had a debt reduction plan. So basically, we do capital budgets every year in June, and that capital budget is $8.5 million. So by doing that, I've actually, I planned on lowering the debt under my first term at $6 million. We're actually over, it's in my 7th year now, so we should be up to, by this point, $7.5 million. But we're $43 million. I've reduced the debt. So what I'm going to do is we're going to do our $8.5 million capital budget that we do every year. But then on top of that, we're going to do $1.5 million just for these flooding issues in town. So every year we'll do $1.5 million in addition to our regular capital budget, in addition to going for whatever grants we can get. So the opportunity came, for Normandy, just because Tom's River, because they were looking for a shared service, and that's very attractive to the state. So that's why we applied for that. So as you saw the chart before, perhaps Shore Acres could be considered worse because it's more impact on properties and stuff. But we're not going to just say, well, yeah, let's not try to jump on board here in Normandy with Tom's River because we should do Shore Acres first. Whatever becomes available, and there might be different things. At one point, there might be funding that comes in for a grant that has to do with wetlands and near wetlands. Obviously, at that point, Normandy is not going to be considered for that because you don't have wetlands. But out on Snake Road, that's all wetlands. So whatever grant opportunities come up throughout this process, until everything is completed and getting them long-term plans and all that, we just have to apply for it. Doesn't matter if it's particular. It has to be a low-income area. We have that. In your case, it was a combined service, shared service with Tom's River. Like I said, wetlands grants, all these different things. We just have to apply for all those grants in addition to the $1.5 million that the town's doing, every year with regards to it.
So that $1.5 million is on top of, like this year's capital budget is $8.5. So this will be for next year going forward, the increase to $10 million. This 8.5 million does include, matching funds that we need for the municipal aid application with Tom's River, includes the flapper valves. It includes
Act Engineering.
includes the funds for Act Engineering, and we had already had a design completed for an elevation out on Bernard and Mathis. So this year we have funded for the construction. So we're going to be still using some capital funds each year to pick away at different neighborhoods and communities, and we're going to increase that by the $1.5 million each year. So that will help make a huge difference, and will also make us much more appealing to funders who want to see people bringing their match to the table ready to go. So I hope that answers the question.
Hey, Joanne, it's Steve Kirby. Just to clarify for ACT, and one of those early slides, it makes it seem that the bulkhead only got overrun or breached once in the last 10 years. Frankly, Broad Avenue gets breached 3 or 4 times a year, and it goes right over one lagoon into the other. So there's a lot of bulkhead.
I didn't want to point that, but what Mr. Richter did not say, he said that, but he said that was because that was the bulkhead elevation that he was aware of. He said he didn't have the bulkhead elevations for the rest. And Mr. Richter, if you could jump in, he said that that's what, he wasn't saying that, even though that kept being repeated as a fact that he said.
And if you could touch on what wind does to water over a bulkhead too, that would be helpful.
Jeff?
Yeah, well, the wind is going to drive. If you have a driving wind, it's going to push the water up and over the bulkheads. It's going to be higher than, it's going to make the water go higher than the tide in certain situations. And I did say the bulkheads, we don't have all the elevations of the bulkheads. We're going based on the aerial topography that we have. And the one slide that I showed more significant for 3.4, more significant flooding. We also have slides that go all the way up at 1 or 0.1 foot intervals that show that it occurs before that in some areas. You can see where the water is coming from the backyard. Now, we don't know, because we don't have the actual bulkhead height, if it's actually breaching the bulkhead, because the data that we have, because bulkheads are so thin from an aerial, it's hard to pick. They can't really pick it up. They can pick up the water side and the land, but it's hard to pick up the actual height of the bulkhead.
But Mr. Richter, so this is Jeannie McCurdy on Broad Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to say, I don't have data. I don't have aerials. I don't have any of your,
sure.
I don't have those kinds of things, but we do take pictures, and we're not experiencing a bulkhead problem. That doesn't mean we might not in the future, but that's not our problem. And that's why, we're wondering about the experience of coastal or marine engineers in your firm, and the data that you're collecting. And that's why we're questioning that, because just as Mr. Kirby just mentioned, and I think Mr. Timoni just pointed out recently, that's not the situation here. One time in 10 years or twice in 10 years, whatever it is, it's not the frequency. That's not what we're experiencing here. It's not a bulk problem.
Jeannie, that's why I disagree with you, Jeannie. I was saying just the opposite. I've watched the water go right across the Broad Avenue from one lagoon that you're on into the pond that I'm on, right through Janice Rubin's house. It's at least 3 times a year. That's let's say 3 out of 10 times our problem, and 7 times is the rain. Or the coming up through the storm drains is 7 out of 10, and 3 out of 10, it's the bulkhead problem.
But Steve, the water, as far as I know, has never breached the bulkheads in the vicinity of the clubhouse, nor has it ever breached the beach, right? I've never seen it. Has it ever encroached upon the tennis courts?
Yes, it has. I can show you pictures where it has. That's
and when was that?
About 2 months ago. And that's why we're putting this new bulkhead in that's 2 or 3 feet higher. And on several occasions, it goes right across Broad Avenue from Arrowhead Court. So I'm just shocked that people don't realize it's not all the problem, but 3 times. And once it got to the Bay Beach door itself, it came right up to all the playground.
Okay, so a solution there, and this is a really good point, a solution is, which you've decided to do, which I was unaware of, you would raise the bulkhead there, all right? So, and that happens very infrequently. I'd like to ask Mr. Lawless how many times he's had water on his property as the result of the flooding.
We get flooding all the time from the bay also.
And you get it on your property?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right, just checking.
I'd also like to hear more from what the engineers have to say, since this is their project.
I wasn't aware of that. I don't like to be insulted, Wallace. So if you have any issue with me, please call me. I'll give you my telephone number and we can discuss.
I never insulted you, sir.
Oh, yes, you did.
Because
Yes, you
so
did.
you can have your personal fights.
Enough. Come on. Let's be gentlemen. Let's try to.
Let's be grown-ups.
Okay, so if we remember back, and Jeanette, if you could go back to the inundation mapping of Normandy Beach, there's these two images here were intentionally chosen. The first image is go back two more. Okay, these first images are intentionally chosen because the flood elevation at 2, what you're seeing is that the water's backing up through the storm drainage system. And so it's flooding from the roads to the properties. That's what you're seeing most of the time. And so this is the situation that we're looking to alleviate in the near term. If we advance this and go to the next slide where we're at 3.4, what you're starting to see, one more, there you go, is that inundation is not only coming from the storm drainage system, but it's actually inundating up and over some of these bulkheads. Now, we don't have exact elevations on these bulkheads, so I can't tell you exactly which bulkheads it's coming over, but I can tell you that it's coming from the bay directly onto properties and then back, and then ultimately combining with the water that's coming up through the storm drains. So we've got 2 problems going on simultaneously. And that's why one of the long-term solutions, which get to this higher elevation of water, are going to be much more complex than solving the solutions of the storm drainage system, which is what's been proposed with the check valves and the pipe cleaning and verifying. So what the township has been doing with checking all of these pipes has been exactly the right thing to do, because we can't tell you that the check valves were going to work unless the pipe's in good condition. So the township has gone ahead with their camera chucks and verified the integrity of these systems. Once we put these check valves in, what we need is a differential, a positive pressure from the roadside, from the land side to the bay. So as soon as there's a differential
What Kirby's saying.
As soon as there's a differential from, and so the water on the land is higher than the water in the bay, stormwater, bay water will start to drain from the streets. And that check valve will open and allow that to happen. So you've got 2 things going on, and that's why we tried to break it, where we were solving a good percentage of the routine flooding coming through the roadways at a cost that the township can manage. At this point in time, we're trying to break it into 2 pieces where we're solving as much as we can with the resources we have available. So these 2 images were intentionally chosen to show exactly those 2 things that are going on.
So Eric, looking at this map,
yeah,
elevation, the numbers that are on this, the elevations shown, are those property elevations or are they street elevations?
Those are catch basin elevations.
Catch
Those are the actual catch basins in the streets.
Is that the invert of the pipe or that's the elevation on the grate?
That's the elevation on the grate.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And that's part of the question of additional data that we need. Again, we're working with aerial topography. I don't know what the invert of these pipes are in all situations. So I have to in order to get to final design, we have to know some of that additional detail information.
Are you working on getting that information?
We are working on trying to figure out that information. That's taking this project to the next step. But right now we're giving you concept level solutions.
But you've been retained to get that and bring it along, further along.
We are working with the township on that, yes.
And I have a question again, going back to the township on the flapper valves. Joanne, you mentioned that one valve has been installed for over a year and you've had success. I don't recall the street you said, but that street, I believe, is not on the barrier island. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So they don't experience the problems we have with sand and other debris going down into that valve on a regular basis, correct?
I wouldn't say that. Alyssa, would you agree?
No, it's a beach. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go
I'm
ahead.
on. It's on Van Note Drive, and if you like look up at the end of Van Note Drive, it's the property's a beach.
Mhm.
So they do have as much sand coming. For example, where you had the valve over by Bay Beach, I mean, it's Bay Beach, it's all sand. And there's sand regularly in the road there that's never cleaned out. So that catch basin is constantly absorbing sand. So in theory, that pipe needs to be cleaned out on a weekly basis for that valve to operate properly.
I don't know about weekly, but I know the one on Van Note is working, and it's also on a beach.
Okay, that's encouraging.
It is elevated a few inches above the beach on a bulkhead, to be fair. That pipe on the broad, that sits on the sand.
All right, so clearly for example, the catch basin by Bay Beach is below the beach. So it's not the same scenario. So you are going to have more sand in there.
I believe that was actually rectified when Albert put in the dual pipes. I think he lifted it to prevent that from continuing. I'll check that tomorrow.
Thank you.
Greg, this is Brian Narowski from 506 Normandy Drive. If you are raising the crown of the road and the gutters are going to raise too, does that mean that the grates for those catch basins are also going to be higher?
Yes, they would have to be raised.
So if they were up higher, then the water, even coming back in from the bay without a check valve, would have to get up higher to get to the street, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
So if you raise the grate, do you then have to run a new pipe to have additional pitch or the proper pitch to the bay?
No, you would just raise the top. The pipe is in the bottom of the structure, so you wouldn't necessarily need to. It would depend on if the size was too small, then you might want to change out the pipe.
Because we've been told by, I believe, Alyssa and some of the other town members that one of the reasons it doesn't drain is, again, water. The pipe in the bay is always covered with water.
Right.
And the pitch isn't enough. So again, I'm not sure.
Well, we're only talking a few inches, so you're not going to be able to pick it up that much. I mean, it's certainly something that can be looked at, but again, at the gutters, you're only talking a few inches. You're not talking feet.
Well, we should ask Mr. Lawless what he thinks should be done.
Mr. Timoni,
Enough of that.
Yeah, when you cursed before, I was intending to have you exit the meeting, and I failed to do that. So I'll ask you to behave yourself, please.
Okay, well, I would, if you would like me to exit the meeting, I'd be happy to do so, because I've been insulted a few times tonight, more than a few times, and I've been cut off. Somebody called me a moron, all right? And you can only take so much, Joanne.
I know. Trust me. I know. Trust me. I
Okay.
know.
All right.
Is there anything, any other questions from anybody here?
I apologize.
Is there any other questions from the folks in Normandy?
Yes, hi, this is Eileen Morano.
Hi, Eileen.
Would it be possible to get a copy of this presentation?
Yes, so the presentation I will send out to the Normandy Beach Community Group email I have, but also this meeting, the video of this meeting, including the presentation and the questions asked and answered, I will send everybody a link to that. So for any of your neighbors, or if you want to sit and watch it again, if you feel you missed pieces, I'll send the link also to the Normandy Beach Association group.
That would be great. And are there any specific actions that you would like the Normandy Beach residents to take in the immediate future? Is there, for instance, I have video and pictures going back to 2016, none of which I've loaded or forwarded because I didn't want to overwhelm the amount of pictures. Are you still looking for pictures? Would you like us to send video pictures, or do you think you have enough?
Well, I don't want to speak for ACT. I don't know if ACT was still looking for data.
Yes, I think we, as Carol had indicated, if you have pictures, especially if they have, I mean, we really need to have a date on them. So then we can go back and look at the tide from that day. And then we can get an idea of the flooding and match it up with the elevation of the tide from that day. So even if you take photos, if you could, when you send them what day and time you took them so that we can get a better understanding of that.
Okay, great. Anything else?
Yeah.
I have a question, Joanne.
Yes.
It's Mary Bovich. Did you forward to ACT all the pictures that we had been sending you
I
over
did.
the months?
I did.
And most
Yes.
of them were dated, right? I think so, or locations at least.
I
Okay.
don't recall, Mary,
Okay,
but I did send them on.
okay, thank
Yes,
you.
and we appreciate those. As I said earlier, we really do appreciate the photos you've been sending, and it does help us with as we put this all together. But as Jeff just said, if we can have time and dates, that would be even more helpful. So thank you.
Some of them are actually in this presentation.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, we noticed.
Did you receive pictures this morning?
The other thing I'll say is that we have thrown a lot of information at you tonight, and we realize that. And there will be questions that come up. So there's places here, on this slide that we're showing now with the brick flooding at ACT Engineers or public meeting questions at bricktownship.net. If you do have questions, please forward those to us, and we'll be happy to address those as part of the final report, as part of what we're doing here. So.
Hi, it's Jim Henlon. I have a summary question for the people at ACT. I appreciate all the efforts that you're doing, and I'm very supportive of the plan. You're talking about the conceptual plan. You presented it to us tonight. When does the conceptual plan end and then the design phase start?
Do you want me to answer that, Carol?
Yeah, I think that would be a good one, Joanne.
So we would authorize ACT to do the design of a specific project as we went forward with taking a look at the bigger picture of what pieces lay ahead of us. So we're going to first focus on the shared service with Toms River for those roadway elevations, installing the flapper valves, and then we'll look at what project we may do next, and then they would be asked to design based on that. So we're going to be going forward step by step with not only this neighborhood, but the other neighborhoods.
Great. And is the design also done by ACT?
Well, go ahead, Mayor.
So the Toms River one, which is your project, so that's really what you guys care about, is not going to be ACT. That's going to be designed by the Toms River engineers who have had success over there, and they wanted to take the lead on the grant application and therefore on the design and all. So, that's where we're going to go, with that particular project, which is your project, the elevation, road elevation in Normandy. But otherwise, we'll pretty much stick with ACT because they're the ones who have all the data and have done all the groundwork. With the exception of, like I said, the Toms River engineer has done the groundwork over in your area for the Toms River portion and how it impacts the brick portion, and therefore going with them for that particular project. But otherwise, it would be going forward with ACT. There's no reason to retain somebody else when they have all the groundwork done and the data. That's it's just general practice that we do here in brick. I don't know if other towns follow the same, but
That sounds great. Thank you. I think that's a great first step.
So I have a follow-up question for the mayor or administrator. When we met with you back in January and February, you said you were going to hire ACT in part to assist in completing applications for grant monies. Mm-hmm. With the work that they've completed, are we at that point? Are we near that point for applying for any grants? And if so, what grants are we going to be applying for? Because you recall when we met with FEMA and some of the other state organizations, they said we needed the assistance of an engineering firm to have more success. So I want to know, Toms River's taking the lead on that project, that grant. What other projects are we looking for grant money for at this point?
Well, we would like to meet with NJOEM and talk to them about the data that we've gathered and the work that we've done, and see if they can direct us to specific state funding, which is what FEMA had suggested. We did reach out to NJOEM. We requested a meeting. They immediately responded that they would be happy to do that, but have since told us that they would need more time before they could focus back in on post-disaster grant funding because they are otherwise occupied with pandemic response. So in the meantime, we will continue the flapper valves. We'll apply for municipal aid grants and any other, what program? Yeah, right. We had asked them about that resiliency program that they were launching, but they're all refocused to other areas than flood mitigation. So we will look through other avenues that are available in the meantime and continue to hope to engage these funders at a point in time when they're able to have these discussions with us.
So basically, all the work that ACT's doing, none of their work's going to be applied to any grant applications at this time.
That's absolutely not what I said, and I have no idea how you take things people say and you turn it into completely not what they said, but you do that every time I try to say something, and that is absolutely not what I said.
Well, then please clarify for me, because I understood.
You can watch it again. We're going to send you a link.
Make your money from the state.
And you can watch the tape as many times as you like and hear me repeat myself.
Well, no, the clarification was that you said the OEM money from the state has been put on hold, so dealing with the pandemic. And it sounded to me, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, that that's the only application that we're going to be applying for that we need the assistance of ACT. Otherwise, Brick already has the information, and you're able to complete the other applications on your own for the smaller grants. Is that not correct?
I didn't hear that. Does anybody else have a question?
Yes, I have a question. Mr.
Thanks
Mayor,
for the clarification.
You're welcome.
Mr. Mayor, when can we expect some results and see a decrease in the flooding of these streets in Normandy Beach? Is this weeks? Is it years?
It's
what's the timeline?
As soon as we go out the bid and everything, that's explained a little bit earlier. So not too long, right?
Not for the flappers, no. And then the grant application, if it gets funded, I mean, we've outlined what we're working on time and time and time again.
What does that look like, though? I mean, is it weeks? Is it months? Is there a date in mind? Is there a timeline?
Flapper valves had, I mean, I don't really want to repeat it. There's a lot of people on the meeting that heard the answer. I can always watch it again, but I'll do it real quick. The council has to go out to, we just went out to bid for it. The bidding process, companies, they put in for it, and then the council has to award the bid. And then there's a pre-con meeting, and then the construction starts. How long that takes? It has to be out on the street for a certain period of time, which I believe is 31 days. And then the council, depending on when the council meeting is, if it's the next night, they can award right away. If it's 13 days later, it's 13 days later. And then there's a pre-con meeting, and then construction starts.
So what date is that?
Well, there is no date.
As you're talking.
You're not going to end this call with a date. We have committed to updating you with the progress of what we're working on, and that's what we're doing.
Can we get an approximate date?
No,
is this
I'm not
6
going
months?
to do that. Nope.
Because then you're going to say, oh, you said May, and it's June. You believe it's, oh my gosh, it's June 12th. Yeah. Can you believe it? It's supposed to be in May, and it's June 12th, and we haven't had a meeting. So no.
Well, we've been waiting. We've been waiting
as it goes along.
We've been waiting years.
We made a commitment and a promise to keep you updated as things move along, and we have not wavered from that at all, and have done so and done so very well.
I beg to differ, Mr. Mayor. You've wavered quite a bit. Now we're only getting 3 flapper valves in all of Normandy Beach, and there's well over 25 catch basins that are overflowing.
I'm not sure where you heard that, but please watch.
It's not going to be the solution.
Not sure where you heard that, whoever that was, but please watch the meeting again, and you'll have the proper information.
We've been watching the meetings, and we've been
being insulted by you.
Is there any questions out there? If we're going to have this argument, it's a complete waste of time.
When can we expect some results?
Shortly.
And if there's no other questions, I hate to do this to the good people of Normandy Beach, but we'd like to end the meeting since we've stopped being productive. Is there any other questions? And anyone that's on the call can feel free to email us directly. We're always happy to have dialogue with anybody with realistic questions and partnership on solutions. We just really, obviously, you can tell we would choose not to waste our time on negative dialogue.
Thank you very much for all your help tonight. We appreciate it. Bye.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
You're
Township.
very welcome. You're very welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're so welcome. Thank you.